I still remember the exact moment everything changed. Sitting across from Blake Harrington, the founder's nephew, and our incompetent CEO, as he threatened to fire me after 5 years of dedicated service. "You should thank me for letting you stay this long," he sneered, leaning back in his chair. I didn't reply, just handed the envelope across the table. The CFO opened it, went pale, and whispered, Who signed off on this?" Silence filled the room. "Get our lawyers on the phone. Now." In that moment, I knew the company would never be the same. My journey at Meridian Technologies began 6 years ago when I was hired as a junior operations coordinator. Back then, Meridian was a thriving software company, known for its innovative supply chain management solutions. Our founder, Gerald Harrington, personally interviewed me for the position. I remember how his piercing blue eyes lit up when I explained my ideas for streamlining our distribution processes. "You understand what matters, Rhonda," Gerald said, reaching across his modest desk to shake my hand. "Efficiency isn't just about cutting costs. It's about creating systems that work so well they become invisible." That philosophy became my guiding principle as I rose through the ranks. Within 3 years, I became operations manager, overseeing a team of 20 employees and managing relationships with dozens of vendors and partners. Under my leadership, we reduced operating costs by 18% while improving delivery times by 30%. Gerald frequently invited me to present my innovations at board meetings, a rare honor for someone at my level. "Rhonda understands this company better than people who've been here 20 years. He once told the board as I concluded a presentation on our new inventory management system. The pride I felt in that moment is something I'll never forget. Everything changed when Gerald's health began to decline. At first, it was subtle. He'd reschedule meetings or leave early for doctor appointments. Then he started missing days, sometimes weeks. The board of directors began discussing succession plans in hushed tones, but Gerald resisted any suggestion that he step aside. "This company is my life's work," he told me during a rare private moment. "I built it from nothing. The thought of handing it over terrifies me." I understood his fear, but worried about the leadership vacuum his absences created. Reports went unapproved, decisions delayed, and competitors began to circle. Sensing vulnerability, during this period, I took on additional responsibilities, often working 14-hour days to keep operations running smoothly. In my expanded role, I noticed concerning financial irregularities, unusual expenses, questionable vendor contracts, inconsistent reporting. I initially attributed these to disorganization during Gerald's absences, and made notes to address them once things stabilized. Then Blake Harrington appeared. I first encountered Gerald's nephew at the company holiday party. He moved through the room with unearned confidence, introducing himself as the Harrington heir despite having no official role at Meridian. Blake was 32, with his uncle's height but none of his warmth. Where Gerald was thoughtful and measured, Blake was loud and impulsive. "My uncle talks about you all the time," he told me, his handshake too firm, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Says you're some kind of operational wizard." Something in his tone made my skin crawl, but I smiled politely. "Just doing my job." "Well, we all have our roles to play, don't we?" he replied cryptically. Over the next few weeks, Blake appeared with increasing frequency, sitting in on executive meetings, touring facilities, reviewing confidential documents. Gerald introduced him as a temporary consultant who was learning the business. What concerned me wasn't just Blake's sudden presence, but his complete lack of relevant experience. He had an MBA from a prestigious university, but had cycled through 4 failed business ventures in 5 years. His LinkedIn profile described him as a serial entrepreneur and visionary disruptor, but industry contacts told a different story. Unpaid vendors, abandoned projects, and burned bridges. Still, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. If Gerald trusted him, perhaps I should too. That changed on a Tuesday morning in April, when an emergency board meeting was called. Employees whispered nervously as board members arrived looking grim. I was asked to attend, unusual for these closed-door sessions. Gerald entered last, looking frailer than I'd ever seen him. He leaned heavily on a cane, his face gaunt and gray. Blake followed close behind, one hand on his uncle's elbow in a show of support that seemed rehearsed. "Thank you all for coming," Gerald began, his voice weak but steady. "I've received some difficult news that I need to share. My doctors have confirmed that I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis is not good." Gasps filled the room. Gerald had been the heart and soul of Meridian for 25 years. The thought of losing him was devastating on both personal and professional levels. "I need to focus on my treatment and put my affairs in order," he continued. "Which means I must step back from day-to-day operations effective immediately." My heart raced. Meridian needed strong, experienced leadership during this transition. The logical choice would be our COO, Sarah Jameson, who had 15 years with the company and Gerald's complete trust. Gerald paused, surveying the room. "In this difficult time, I believe family is best positioned to protect my legacy. Therefore, I'm appointing my nephew, Blake Harrington, as interim CEO, effective immediately." The room fell silent. Board members exchanged concerned glances. Sarah's face flushed with shock and hurt. And Blake smiled, that same empty smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I won't let you down, Uncle," he said, placing his hand on Gerald's shoulder. "I'll protect everything you've built." As the meeting adjourned, I caught Gerald's eye. For just a moment, I thought I saw doubt cloud his expression, a flicker of uncertainty about the decision he'd just made. Then Blake guided him from the room, already speaking about his vision for Meridian's future. In that moment, I knew everything was about to change, but I had no idea just how drastically. Blake wasted no time making his mark on Meridian Technologies. By the end of his first week as CEO, he had completely transformed the executive office that Gerald had kept largely unchanged for 20 years. Out went the practical, understated furniture that reflected Gerald's pragmatic nature. In came custom Italian leather seating, abstract art valued at thousands of dollars, and a desk that could have served as a dining table for 10 people. "First impressions matter in business," Blake explained when questioned about the expenditure during our first executive meeting. "We need to project success if we want to be successful." The irony wasn't lost on me when, 20 minutes later, he announced company-wide austerity measures to address what he called financial inefficiencies under his uncle's leadership. These measures included freezing annual raises, reducing department budgets by 15%, and eliminating the tuition assistance program that had helped dozens of employees advance their education. "These are temporary sacrifices for long-term gains," Blake assured us with practiced sincerity. I might have believed him if not for what happened the following week. Blake hired 3 friends from business school, Jackson, Trevor, and Ryan, for newly created executive positions with salaries that made my jaw drop. Jackson became our chief strategy officer, despite having no experience in our industry. Trevor was named director of business transformation, a title no one could clearly define. And Ryan became executive consultant for growth initiatives, another position created seemingly out of thin air. Meanwhile, my operations team faced the deepest budget cuts in the company. We lost 2 key staff members whose positions wouldn't be refilled, and our technology upgrade was indefinitely postponed. When I presented data showing how these cuts would impact our efficiency and client deliverables, Blake dismissed my concerns. "The old ways of doing business are over, Rhonda," he said with a condescending smile. "Sometimes you need to break things down to build them back stronger." Within a month, clients began calling with concerns. Deliveries were delayed. Technical issues went unresolved. The seamless operations we'd prided ourselves on were beginning to fray. I worked nights and weekends trying to maintain our standards with diminished resources, often sleeping on the couch in my office to handle urgent matters. During this chaos, I found an unexpected ally in Alicia Winters, our finance director. She had been with the company almost as long as I had, and shared my concerns about Blake's leadership. "Look at this," she whispered one day, sliding a document across my desk during a rare moment alone. It was a financial report showing Blake and his friends had already received substantial bonuses, ostensibly for emergency onboarding and extraordinary transitional leadership. "This was approved while they were cutting the holiday bonus for staff," Alicia said, her voice tight with anger. Together, we tried to maintain some semblance of order amid the growing chaos. When Blake stopped attending product development meetings, I stepped in to ensure our engineers had the direction they needed. When he failed to communicate with key clients, I arranged calls to reassure them of our commitment. I became the unofficial glue holding Meridian together, as Blake focused on what he called high-level strategic initiatives, which seemed to consist primarily of long lunches with his friends and golf outings with potential partners who never materialized into actual business. The final insult came during the quarterly board meeting. Blake presented a detailed analysis of operational improvements that had saved the company over $2 million in the past quarter, improvements my team had implemented before he even joined the company. He took complete credit, never once mentioning my name or my department's efforts. I sat in stunned silence as board members congratulated him on his impressive early impact. Later, when I tried to correct the record privately with board chair William Foster, he seemed uncomfortable but unmoved. "Blake is Gerald's choice, Rhonda. We need to support him during this transition period." The transition period turned into a mass exodus. Senior engineers who had been with Meridian for years began leaving for competitors. Our sales director, unable to sell products that were increasingly unreliable, resigned to join a startup. Each departure weakened the foundation Gerald had spent decades building. I tried repeatedly to schedule meetings with Blake to discuss these issues, but he was always in strategic sessions or meeting with potential investors. His assistant, a college friend's sister with no previous experience, became an impenetrable wall between Blake and the company's actual operations. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Blake called an all-hands meeting to announce a corporate restructuring. Standing before the anxious employees, many of whom were already overworked trying to compensate for departed colleagues, he outlined a plan that sent shockwaves through the company. Effective immediately, we're consolidating several departments to eliminate redundancies and maximize synergies, he declared, using buzzwords that meant nothing in practice. The quality assurance department will be absorbed into development. Customer support will merge with sales, and our regional offices in Denver and Austin will close, with those operations centralized here at headquarters. These changes eliminated 34 positions, many held by employees who had been with Meridian for over a decade. As people looked around in shock, trying to process if their jobs were among those cut, Blake wasn't finished. Additionally, I'm pleased to announce several new leadership positions to guide us through this exciting transformation. He went on to introduce 3 more friends from his MBA program who would be joining the executive team, all with inflated titles, all with salaries higher than department heads who had been with the company for years, and all with zero experience relevant to our industry. As I looked around the room at the faces of dedicated employees now facing unemployment or impossible workloads, something hardened inside me. This wasn't just bad business, it was the systematic destruction of everything Gerald had built and everything I had worked to maintain and improve. Walking back to my office after that meeting, I made a decision that would change everything. Blake Harrington might have the title and the family name, but he had underestimated the woman who knew this company better than anyone else. If Gerald was too ill to see what was happening, then it would fall to me to protect his legacy and the livelihoods of everyone who depended on Meridian. I had no idea then how personal and dangerous this battle would become, or how far Blake would go to maintain his position. But looking back, I realized that was the moment I stopped being just an operations manager and became something more, an unexpected guardian of a company under siege from within. The day after Blake's restructuring announcement, I arrived at the office at 5:30 in the morning. The building was empty and quiet, perfect for what I needed to do. I created a new email account using a secure service, then established a private cloud storage location unconnected to Meridian's systems. These would be my digital vaults for what came next. My position as operations manager gave me access to a wide range of information: purchase orders, vendor contracts, project timelines, budget allocations. I began systematically reviewing everything that had crossed Blake's desk in the 3 months since he'd taken over. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found a pattern of irregular expenditures coded as strategic consulting services paid to a company called Horizon Innovations LLC. The name wasn't familiar, but something about it raised red flags. A quick search revealed that Horizon had been incorporated just 2 weeks before Blake became CEO. Digging deeper, I discovered it was registered to Ryan Sullivan, one of Blake's business school friends whom he'd recently hired as an executive. Meridian had paid Horizon over $200,000 for undefined services with no deliverables specified. This wasn't just nepotism, it looked like potential fraud. I documented everything, saving screenshots and copying files to my secure storage. The next day, I approached Alicia from finance with a carefully worded question. Have you reviewed the invoices from Horizon Innovations? The accounting seems unusual. Her eyes widened slightly before she glanced around to ensure no one was listening. Can you come by my office at 6, after most people have left? That evening, Alicia closed her office door and pulled out a thick folder. I've been tracking concerning transactions since Blake started, she admitted. Not just Horizon. There are at least 5 vendors that appeared overnight, all with connections to Blake or his friends, none with verifiable deliverables. She showed me financial reports indicating our cash reserves had dropped dramatically, far more than could be explained by normal operations or Blake's official cost-cutting measures. He's bleeding the company, Rhonda. I don't know if it's incompetence or something worse. Together, we created a spreadsheet, tracking every questionable transaction, building a financial timeline that painted an alarming picture. But we needed more if we were going to do anything with this information. My next ally came from an unexpected quarter. Derek Chen, an IT specialist who had been with Meridian for 8 years, approached me after overhearing Blake discussing surveillance of problem employees with his newly appointed HR director, Marcus. They're monitoring your email, Derek warned me quietly during a coffee break. And they've flagged your system access patterns for review. Instead of frightening me, this information confirmed I was on the right track. Derek agreed to help, providing me with secure methods to continue my investigation without detection. He also recovered deleted emails, showing Blake had been redirecting company resources to a side business, a startup called Next Level Dynamics, that he hadn't disclosed to the board or employees. The pieces were coming together, but the picture they formed was uglier than I had imagined. Blake wasn't just an incompetent leader installed through nepotism. He appeared to be actively exploiting his position for personal gain while undermining the company's stability. My concerns grew when Blake appointed his college friend Marcus as HR director, replacing Janet Simmons, who had built our human resources department from the ground up over 15 years. Janet was offered a lateral move to an administrative role, effectively a demotion designed to make her quit. She left the following week. Marcus had no HR experience beyond a 2-month internship at a recruiting firm. His first official act was to revise the employee handbook, removing key protections against wrongful termination and adding stringent non-disclosure agreements. His second act was to begin building files on problematic employees, those who had questioned Blake's decisions or expressed concerns about company direction. My name topped the list. As my investigation deepened, Blake began excluding me from meetings where I had previously been an essential participant: strategic planning sessions, client relationship reviews, budget discussions. Suddenly, I was not required for conversations central to my role. I received meeting summaries afterward, sanitized versions that I knew omitted critical details. Despite these obstacles, I continued gathering evidence. I developed relationships with concerned board members through carefully worded emails expressing clarification questions about company direction. I never explicitly criticized Blake, but asked questions that highlighted contradictions between his stated goals and actual outcomes. 2 board members, Patricia Douglas and Thomas Weber, began responding with questions of their own, suggesting growing concern at the highest levels. My most disturbing discovery came 6 months into Blake's tenure. While reviewing contract negotiations with CompTech, one of our largest potential clients, I noticed a pattern of missed deadlines and communication failures that had ultimately tanked the deal. This aligned with several other failed negotiations under Blake's leadership, all with companies that would have significantly strengthened Meridian's market position. What didn't make sense was why Blake would sabotage valuable partnerships. The answer came through Derek, who recovered deleted email exchanges between Blake and his friend Ryan, discussing how the failed CompTech deal worked out perfectly for NextWave, a competitor that had swooped in to sign CompTech after our negotiations collapsed. Further digging revealed Ryan owned significant equity in NextWave. The implications were staggering. Blake wasn't just incompetent, he appeared to be deliberately undermining Meridian's business relationships to benefit companies he and his friends were secretly invested in. I compiled everything into a secure folder and created a backup stored off-site at my apartment. The evidence was damning, but I knew presenting it prematurely would give Blake the opportunity to discredit me and destroy proof. I needed more, particularly about Blake's relationship with the board and his uncle Gerald, whose health had deteriorated to the point where he was rarely mentioned in company communications anymore. My chance came unexpectedly during a rare direct interaction with Blake. Passing him in the hallway, he stopped me with a cold smile. "Rhonda, just the person I wanted to see. The quarterly operations report seems to be missing some information about efficiency metrics." "Which metrics specifically?" I asked, knowing I had included every standard measurement. "The ones showing the positive impact of our reorganization," he replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "The numbers need to reflect the improvements we've discussed for the board presentation." He was asking me to falsify data, a line I wouldn't cross. "I can only report the actual figures, Blake. And currently, they show efficiency down 23% since the reorganization." His face hardened. "That's not the narrative we're presenting. Review your calculations and find the errors. I need a revised report showing at least 10% improvement by tomorrow morning." As he walked away, I realized he had just handed me the evidence I needed to confirm his willful misrepresentation to the board. I immediately documented the conversation and updated my files. That evening, Derek contacted me urgently. "They're planning something. Marcus just requested access to your complete employment file and email archive for standard review purposes. You need to be careful." His warning came just in time. The next morning, when I submitted the unchanged operations report with a detailed methodology explaining the metrics, Blake called me into a meeting with Marcus from HR. They accused me of insubordination and placed a formal warning in my file, the first step toward termination. As I left that meeting, I passed the desk of Stephanie, Blake's assistant. Her computer screen showed an open email with a subject line that made my blood run cold. Rhonda Wilson termination timeline. They were building a case against me. The clock was ticking, and I needed to move faster than I'd planned. What I didn't know was that Blake had an even more aggressive move prepared, one that would temporarily cut me off from all the evidence I had been gathering and push me to the brink of professional destruction. The atmosphere at Meridian grew increasingly hostile over the following weeks. Blake began publicly criticizing my work during meetings, interrupting my presentations with dismissive comments like, "That's not quite right, Rhonda," or, "We need someone with a fresher perspective on this." No matter how thoroughly I prepared or how accurate my data, he found ways to undermine me. His inner circle joined in, creating a toxic environment where I was constantly on the defensive. Trevor, Blake's director of business transformation, began referring to my department as the legacy operation code for outdated and unnecessary. Ryan would visibly check his phone whenever I spoke, signaling to others that my input wasn't worth attention. The most painful betrayal came from James Parker, a colleague I'd worked closely with for 4 years. We'd collaborated on countless projects, and often had lunch together. I considered him a friend as well as a coworker. After Blake promoted him to senior project manager, a position created specifically for him with a substantial salary increase, James stopped returning my calls and emails. Then I overheard him in the break room, laughing with Blake's friends. "Rhonda's still operating like it's Gerald's company," he said. "She doesn't understand the new direction, too set in her ways." Each day brought new challenges. My team members were gradually reassigned to other departments with minimal explanation. Projects I'd developed were handed to Blake's friends to implement, invariably resulting in delays and quality issues that were somehow blamed on my poor initial planning. Marcus from HR accelerated his campaign against me. I received emails questioning expense reports from months earlier, reports that had already been approved. My request for annual leave to attend my cousin's wedding was denied due to critical operational needs despite being submitted 3 months in advance. Then came the performance review from hell. "Your communication skills need significant improvement." Marcus read from a document that contradicted my consistently excellent prior reviews. "Multiple team members have expressed frustration with your leadership style, describing it as rigid and outdated." "Which team members?" I asked. "I'd like the opportunity to address specific concerns." "That information is confidential," he replied smugly. "But I assure you, the feedback was consistent and concerning." I knew these were fabricated complaints, but challenging them directly would only reinforce the narrative that I was difficult. Instead, I maintained my composure and focused on continuing my documentation of Blake's mismanagement. This became more difficult when my email access was suddenly restricted due to security protocols. I could send and receive messages, but lost access to my archive of past communications. IT claimed it was a company-wide security upgrade, but I noticed Blake's inner circle wasn't affected. Then came the monitor. Derek warned me that my computer activities were being tracked with specialized software that captured screenshots at random intervals. Even my keystrokes were being logged. Any documentation I created on company systems would be visible to them. "They're building a case, Rhonda," Derek said during a hurried conversation in the parking garage. "They want to fire you for cause to avoid severance and prevent you from qualifying for unemployment." The pressure was immense, not just professionally, but financially. I was the primary support for my aging parents, who faced significant medical expenses. My father had recently been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and my mother needed knee replacement surgery. Losing my job wouldn't just hurt my career, it would devastate my family. Despite these challenges, I continued gathering evidence using personal devices and off hours. I documented Blake's pattern of taking credit for successful initiatives while blaming others for failures. I tracked the exodus of talent 28 key employees had left in 7 months, taking with them decades of institutional knowledge. I compiled client complaints that had been buried or dismissed. Then came the most blatant attack yet. Returning from lunch one Tuesday, I found Blake, Marcus, and security guards waiting at my desk. "We've detected unauthorized access to proprietary information from your computer," Blake announced loudly enough for nearby colleagues to hear. "We have reason to believe you're sharing confidential data outside the company." My heart raced as I realized what was happening. "That's absolutely false. I've never shared confidential information." "The logs show otherwise," Marcus said, handing me an official-looking document. Multiple large files were transferred to external storage devices over the past 2 weeks. I recognized the files. They referenced standard operational reports I regularly backed up as part of my job. Nothing confidential, nothing improper, but they were twisting routine actions into something sinister. As a result, Blake continued, clearly enjoying the moment, "You're being placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation. Please surrender your company laptop and access badge immediately." Security escorted me out, as colleagues watched in shocked silence. My face burned with humiliation as I walked through the office carrying my personal belongings in a cardboard box the universal symbol of corporate disgrace. The formal notice arrived by courier the next morning. I was suspended indefinitely without pay while they investigated alleged data theft and corporate espionage. My health insurance would continue for 30 days, after which I would be responsible for the full premium if I wished to maintain coverage. The letter strongly implied termination was the expected outcome once the investigation concluded. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands. This was their move to neutralize me, cutting off my access to company systems and the evidence I'd been gathering. They likely assumed I'd give up, look for another job, and fade away quietly rather than fight a battle that seemed increasingly unwinnable. They had miscalculated severely. Being placed on leave actually gave me something precious time. Time to organize the evidence I'd already gathered. Time to connect with allies who could still access internal information. Time to build the case that would eventually expose Blake's corruption. That evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Alicia standing there, her expression grim. "They're saying horrible things about you," she said as I ushered her inside. "But I know they're lies. And I think I know why they moved against you now." She placed her laptop on my dining table and opened a spreadsheet. "Blake is planning to announce a merger with TechCore Industries next month. On paper, it looks like an expansion opportunity, but when you dig into the details," she scrolled through the document, "it's actually a controlled dismantling of Meridian. Most departments would be labeled redundant and eliminated. The valuable patents and client relationships would transfer to TechCore, while Meridian's corporate shell would absorb all outstanding liabilities." "And let me guess," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "Blake gets a golden parachute and a senior position at TechCore." Alicia nodded grimly. "Executive vice president with a 3-year guaranteed contract at twice his current salary, plus stock options. He needs to remove anyone who might recognize and expose what this deal really is." Looking at the merger documents, I felt a cold clarity replace my earlier distress. This wasn't just about me anymore. Blake wasn't just pushing out one troublesome employee, he was preparing to destroy Gerald's company entirely, throwing hundreds of loyal employees out of work while enriching himself in the process. "We need to move faster," I told Alicia, "and we need more help." Over the next 2 weeks, a small resistance formed. Derek continued, providing technical support and access to digital evidence. Alicia tracked financial maneuvers. Patricia from the board quietly shared concerns about Blake's reporting and decision-making, and I coordinated everything, compiling a comprehensive case documenting not just nepotism and incompetence, but what appeared to be systematic fraud and corporate sabotage. What we didn't know was that Blake had already scheduled my formal termination for the following Monday. The accusation of data theft was just the beginning. According to the draft termination letter Marcus had prepared shared with me by a sympathetic HR assistant, I would be accused of sabotaging client relationships, falsifying reports, and violating my fiduciary duties to the company. Blake planned to announce my firing company-wide, effectively destroying my professional reputation. I had 4 days to complete my case and present it before that happened. 4 days to save my career, Gerald's legacy, and the livelihoods of everyone at Meridian. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. My dining room became command central for what Alicia jokingly called Operation Save Meridian. My walls were covered with timelines, financial charts, and interconnected webs of relationships, showing how Blake and his friends were systematically exploiting the company. It looked like something from a detective movie, but every sticky note and string represented real evidence of misconduct. Derek proved invaluable during this period. Despite the risk to his own position, he created a secure communication channel for our small resistance group and continued extracting critical information from Meridian's servers. "Blake's been sloppy," Derek explained during one of our evening strategy sessions. "He thinks no one's watching, so he's not covering his tracks well. I found server logs showing he's been accessing confidential client information at odd hours and emailing it to his personal accounts." "Can you recover those emails?" I asked. Derek grinned. Already did. And guess who he's been sharing them with? Executives at TechCore, the company he's planning to merge with. He's giving them our client data before any deal is even approved. This was a serious breach of both company policy and potentially laws governing corporate conduct. I added it to our growing file. Alicia's financial investigation revealed even more damning evidence. I've been reviewing capital expenditure approvals, she said, spreading documents across my table. Blake has authorized over $3 million for strategic technology upgrades that don't exist. The money was paid to vendors that appear legitimate at first glance. But when you trace the ownership, let me guess, I interrupted. They connect back to Blake or his friends. Exactly. Shell companies, all of them. The money goes in, some minimal deliverable comes back, and the rest disappears. Our most unexpected ally emerged when Patricia Douglas, one of Meridian's longest-serving board members, requested a meeting with me at a cafe 20 miles from the office. The board is growing concerned, she admitted over coffee, speaking quietly despite the distance from Meridian. Blake's reports show incredible growth and efficiency, but they don't match what we're hearing from the market. Clients are leaving. Talent is fleeing. Product development has stalled. Something doesn't add up. I took a calculated risk. Patricia, what I'm about to tell you needs to stay between us until I can present complete evidence. But Blake is systematically looting the company while preparing to sell it for parts through this TechCore merger. Her face paled as I outlined the scheme. When I finished, she asked the question I'd been waiting for. Does Gerald know any of this? That's what I need your help to determine, I replied. Blake has isolated Gerald from company operations entirely. We know he's seriously ill, but beyond that, we have no idea what he's been told about the company's status. Patricia nodded slowly. Gerald has been my friend for 20 years. He deserves to know what's happening to his life's work. I'll see what I can do. 2 days later, we received our answer. Patricia connected me with Maggie Rivera, Gerald's former executive assistant, who still helped manage his personal affairs. Maggie agreed to meet me at a park near Gerald's home. Blake has been filtering everything that reaches Gerald, Maggie explained as we walked along a secluded path. He tells Gerald the company is thriving under his leadership. When Gerald asks specific questions about clients or employees, Blake provides carefully crafted responses that paint everything in glowing terms. Does Gerald know how many people have left the company? I asked. Maggie shook her head. Blake told him there's been some healthy turnover as part of his modernization efforts, but nothing concerning. He doesn't know about Janet leaving or any of the other executives. And he certainly doesn't know about your suspension. This was worse than I'd feared. Blake was actively deceiving his uncle, manipulating a dying man who had trusted him with everything. How is Gerald's health, really? I asked softly. Maggie's eyes filled with tears. Not good. The treatments are taking a toll. He has good days and bad days, but the bad are outnumbering the good now. That's why Blake's timeline is accelerating. He wants to complete this merger before. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. With this new information, I asked Derek to focus on finding evidence of Blake's communications with TechCore. If we could prove he was negotiating this merger in bad faith, deliberately undervaluing Meridian while arranging personal benefits, we would have our smoking gun. Derek came through spectacularly. Late one night, he called me in a state of barely contained excitement. I found the draft merger agreement on Blake's private server. It's even worse than we thought. Meridian is being undervalued by at least 40%. The redundancies they're planning to eliminate represent over 60% of the current workforce. And Blake's golden parachute? It's not just a position and salary. There's a separate side agreement giving him a $5 million consulting fee payable immediately upon closing. Send it to me immediately, I said, my heart pounding. And Derek, you've done enough. This puts you at serious risk. You should step back now. No chance, he replied firmly. I've been with Meridian since I was 22. This company gave me my career. I'm seeing this through. His loyalty moved me deeply. Despite everything Blake had done, the spirit Gerald had fostered still lived in people like Derek, Alicia, and so many others who believed in what Meridian could and should be. Our final breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Patricia arranged for me to meet with Walter Green, Meridian's CFO. Walter had been notably absent from our resistance efforts, and I'd assumed he was firmly in Blake's camp. I was wrong. I've been documenting everything, Walter confessed during our meeting at his home. At first, I thought Blake was just inexperienced, making rookie mistakes that would correct themselves over time. But then I started seeing patterns. Deliberate patterns. Walter opened his safe and removed a thick binder. This contains financial records that Blake doesn't know I've maintained the real numbers, not the adjusted ones presented to the board. It also includes emails where he explicitly instructed me to modify reports to show positive growth despite actual decline. "Why haven't you come forward before now?" I asked. Walter looked ashamed. "Fear, mostly. I'm 58, Rhonda. If I lost this job, who would hire me at my age and salary level? I have 2 kids in college and a mortgage, but I can't be part of this anymore. What he's doing isn't just unethical, it's illegal." Adding Walter's documentation to our evidence created a comprehensive case that even the most skeptical observer would find compelling. But we still faced a critical challenge: how to present this information before Blake executed his plan to terminate me and rush through the TechCore merger. The answer came on Thursday night when Alicia called with urgent news. Blake has moved up the timeline. The merger proposal is going to the board on Monday, and your termination is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9. Marcus has already drafted the company-wide email announcing your firing for corporate espionage and data theft. They're going to destroy your reputation, Rhonda. My mind raced. We had planned to present our case to key board members individually before bringing it to the full board. Now we had no time for that approach. "What's on Blake's schedule tomorrow?" I asked. "Executive committee meeting at 10, after your termination. Walter will be there, along with the board chair and 2 other directors. A plan formed in my mind, risky, dramatic, but potentially effective. Tell Walter to make sure that meeting happens in the main conference room, not Blake's office. And have him bring hard copies of the real financial reports, not the manipulated ones Blake has been presenting." "What are you going to do?" Alicia asked, concern evident in her voice. "I'm going to crash that meeting. But I need a final piece of evidence first." That piece came from Patricia, who called me an hour later. I spoke with Gerald. It wasn't easy. Blake has people monitoring his visitors and calls. But I got through. 2. He had no idea what's really been happening. When I told him about the mass departures and client losses, he was devastated. When I mentioned your suspension, he was furious. He wants to see you. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. I've arranged for Maggie to bring him to the office for a surprise visit during the executive committee meeting. He's weak, but determined." The pieces were falling into place. I spent the night organizing our evidence into clear, irrefutable exhibits, each documenting a specific aspect of Blake's misconduct. By morning, I had everything prepared in a thick envelope, the kind used for interoffice mail, unremarkable enough not to draw attention as I carried it into Meridian headquarters for what would be the most important meeting of my career. As I parked in the visitor section of the garage, my phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Blake just arrived. Security has been instructed to escort you directly to HR when you arrive. Good luck." I took a deep breath, checked my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror, and prepared to face the man who thought he was about to end my career. He had no idea I was about to end his instead. The security guard looked uncomfortable as he escorted me through the building. Frank had worked at Meridian for over a decade and knew me well. "I'm sorry about this, Rhonda," he mumbled as we walked toward the HR department, just following orders. "I understand, Frank. You're just doing your job." What Frank didn't know, and what gave me confidence despite the circumstances, was that I had no intention of going quietly to HR. My actual destination was the executive conference room on the 4th floor, where Blake would soon be meeting with the leadership team. Timing was everything. As we reached the 3rd floor, I made my move. "Frank, I left some personal items in my old office. Mind if we stop there first? It'll just take a minute." Frank hesitated. "I'm supposed to take you directly to HR. I know, but these are just family photos and a few personal items. Marcus can wait 5 minutes. Frank's expression softened. "All right, but quickly." Once at my office, I thanked Frank and asked for privacy to collect my things. As soon as he stepped outside, I sent a text to Derek. "In position. Status?" His response came immediately. "Executive meeting starting. Blake, Walter, and 3 board members present. Conference room, 4 amperes. Perfect." I gathered a few items to maintain the pretense, then told Frank I was ready to proceed to HR. As we approached the elevator, I pressed the button for the 4th floor instead of the 2nd. "Rhonda, HR is on 2, Frank said with concern. "I know. But before I leave for good, there's something I need to address with the executive team." I held his gaze steadily. "Frank, you've been here long enough to know what's been happening. The company you've served faithfully is being torn apart from the inside. I'm trying to stop that. You can take me to HR afterward, but right now, I need to go to that meeting." Frank looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I didn't see which button you pressed," he said quietly, as the elevator doors opened on the 4th floor. I stepped out alone and walked purposefully toward conference room 4 amperes. Through the glass walls, I could see Blake holding court at the head of the table, gesturing dramatically, as Walter and the board members listened. I took a deep breath, clutched my envelope tightly, and pushed open the door. The conversation stopped abruptly. Blake's expression shifted from surprise to anger in an instant. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in HR finalizing your termination." I remained standing just inside the doorway. I thought it would be more efficient to address the real issues directly with everyone present. "This is completely inappropriate," Blake sputtered, looking to the others for support. "She's been suspended pending termination for corporate espionage. Security should never have let her up here." William Foster, the board chair, looked confused. "Espionage? This is the first I've heard of such serious allegations against Rhonda." Blake recovered quickly. "We were handling it discreetly to avoid unnecessary damage to her reputation. But since she's forced the issue," he leaned back in his chair with manufactured confidence, "we have irrefutable evidence that Rhonda has been sharing confidential company information with outside parties, possibly competitors." This was the moment I'd been preparing for. Rather than defending myself against his accusations, I calmly walked to the table and took the only empty seat, directly across from Blake. That's an interesting accusation coming from someone who has been sharing Meridian's client data with TechCore executives while negotiating a secret merger that would dismantle the company and eliminate 60% of its workforce. The room went silent. Blake's face flushed crimson. "That's absurd. I've been working tirelessly to strengthen Meridian's position in a challenging market. Is that why you've diverted over $3 million to shell companies you and your friends control? Is that why 28 key employees have left in 7 months? Is that why client satisfaction has dropped to its lowest point in company history?" Blake's eyes narrowed. "You have no access to that information. And even if those numbers were accurate, which they aren't, they reflect the necessary pain of transformation. Sometimes things get worse before they get better." "Interesting perspective," I replied, opening my envelope. "I wonder if the board would agree after reviewing the actual data, not the manipulated versions you've been presenting." I began distributing documents to everyone at the table, except Blake. Page 1 shows the real financial performance under Blake's leadership. compared to the adjusted figures presented to the board. Page 2 details the shell companies receiving Meridian funds and their connections to Blake and his appointed executives. Page 3 shows client departure rates and the reasons cited in exit interviews. Blake lunged across the table, attempting to grab the documents, but Walter stopped him with a surprisingly firm hand on his arm. "Let them read it, Blake. It's time for the truth to come out." "You're in on this?" Blake hissed, betrayal evident in his voice. Walter met his gaze steadily. "I've been documenting your financial misrepresentations since they began. These numbers are accurate." As the board members reviewed the evidence, their expressions shifted from confusion to shock to anger. William Foster looked up from the documents, his face ashen. "Blake, is this true? Have you been deliberately misrepresenting company performance?" "Of course not," Blake scoffed. But his confidence was clearly shaken. "These are complex financial matters that can be interpreted in different ways. Rhonda has clearly manipulated this information to make me look bad because she resents my leadership. I had anticipated this defense, which is why I've included source documentation for every figure. Original reports, unaltered data, server logs showing when files were modified, and by whom. Everything is verifiable by independent audit." Blake changed tactics. "Even if there have been some creative accounting methods, they were necessary to position the company for the TechCore merger, which represents a tremendous opportunity for Meridian." I slid another document across the table to William Foster. "This is the draft merger agreement Blake has been secretly negotiating. You'll note on page 12 that Meridian is being undervalued by approximately 40% based on industry standard metrics. And on page 27, you'll find details of Blake's personal compensation package, a $5 million consulting fee payable upon closing, plus a guaranteed executive position at TechCore." Foster scanned the document, his expression darkening. "This hasn't been presented to the board. We have no knowledge of these negotiations, because they know you wouldn't approve it once you understood what it really is. Not a merger, but a liquidation of Meridian's assets that benefits Blake personally while destroying the company Gerald built." At the mention of Gerald's name, Blake's demeanor changed. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a threatening tone. "My uncle trusted me to lead this company through a necessary transition. He understood that his approach was outdated. He gave me full authority to make whatever changes I deemed necessary." "Did he authorize you to fire dedicated employees who questioned your decisions? Did he approve diverting company funds to your personal ventures? Did he know you're planning to sell his life's work for parts while pocketing millions yourself?" Blake's face contorted with rage. "You should thank me for letting you stay this long," he sneered, leaning back in his chair with forced confidence. "Everyone in this room knows you've been resistant to change from day one. You're a relic of the old Meridian, and your time is over." I didn't reply. Instead, I handed one final envelope across the table to Walter. The CFO opened it, scanned the contents, and went pale. Who signed off on this?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The room fell silent as Walter passed the document to William Foster, whose eyes widened in shock. "Get our lawyers on the phone now," Foster demanded, looking at his assistant who had been quietly taking notes in the corner. Blake grabbed the document, his hands shaking as he read. It was a forensic accounting report Patricia had commissioned from an independent firm, documenting in excruciating detail how Blake had systematically diverted company resources, falsified financial reports, and breached his fiduciary duties as CEO. The report concluded that his actions constituted criminal fraud under state and federal statutes. "This is a fabrication," Blake sputtered, throwing the document down. "A desperate attempt by a disgruntled employee to save her job. It's an independent analysis based on financial records Walter provided," I explained calmly. "Records he maintained separately from the manipulated versions you instructed him to create." Blake turned on Walter. "You treacherous old fool. I'll make sure you never work in finance again." I'd rather be unemployed than complicit in fraud, Walter replied with quiet dignity. Blake looked around the room, realizing he was losing control of the narrative. His eyes hardened as he played what he thought was his trump card. This is all very dramatic, but ultimately meaningless. As CEO, I have the full support of the majority shareholder, my uncle. And Gerald is not in any condition to evaluate these ridiculous accusations. So unless you want to spend years in litigation while the company crumbles, I suggest we end this theatrical performance and get back to business. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The conference room door opened, and Gerald Harrington entered, supported by Maggie on one side and Patricia on the other. He looked frail, his once robust frame diminished by illness, but his eyes burned with the same intensity I remembered from my first interview. Actually, Blake, I'm in condition to evaluate quite a lot, Gerald said, his voice weaker than I remembered, but resolute. Patricia has brought me up to speed on your leadership. I've reviewed the financial reports, both versions, and I've spoken with several of the employees and clients who left because of your actions. Blake's face drained of color. Uncle Gerald, you shouldn't be here. You need to rest. These people are manipulating you, taking advantage of your condition. Gerald slowly made his way to the head of the table, Blake's position. Blake reluctantly stood and offered the chair, which Gerald took with Maggie's assistance. I made a terrible mistake, Gerald said, addressing everyone in the room. I let my illness and my fear cloud my judgment. I put my faith in family ties rather than demonstrated character, and in doing so, I nearly destroyed everything I spent my life building. He turned to Blake, his expression a mixture of anger and profound disappointment. As of this moment, you are removed as CEO of Meridian Technologies. Your access to company accounts, systems, and facilities is terminated. You will return any company property in your possession by the end of business today. Blake's shock gave way to fury. You can't do this. We have a contract. I'll sue. Section 4.3 of your employment agreement, Gerald interrupted, provides for immediate termination in cases of gross misconduct, including but not limited to fraudulent misrepresentation and misappropriation of company resources, both of which are thoroughly documented in the materials before us. Gerald turned to William Foster. Bill, please contact security to escort Blake from the building, and have IT revoke all his access immediately. Already done, Foster replied, hanging up his phone. Security is waiting outside. Blake looked around wildly, like a cornered animal. This isn't over. None of you understand what it takes to run a modern technology company. You're all living in the past, just like him. He jerked his head toward Gerald. I was trying to save Meridian from its own obsolescence. By stealing from it? By driving away its most talented people? By deliberately tanking client relationships to benefit your friends' companies? I couldn't help but interject. That wasn't salvation, Blake. It was sabotage. 2 security guards entered the room. Blake looked at them in disbelief, then at his uncle, seeking some sign of relenting. Finding none, his expression hardened. You'll regret this, he said, gathering his personal items from the table. All of you. As security led him out, the room remained silent for a long moment. Then Gerald turned to me, his eyes tired, but clear. Rhonda, I owe you an apology. You tried to protect what I built when I failed to do so myself. Thank you for your courage and your loyalty. Meridian has been my home for 6 years, Gerald. I couldn't stand by and watch it be destroyed. Gerald nodded, then addressed the entire room. We have significant damage to repair to our finances, our client relationships, our company culture. It won't happen overnight, but it starts today. Walter, I need a complete financial assessment. William, call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. And Rhonda, he paused, studying me thoughtfully. I'd like you to serve as interim chief operations officer while we rebuild. We'll need your knowledge and your integrity more than ever." I was speechless momentarily, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune. From nearly terminated to C-suite in less than an hour. "I'd be honored," I finally managed. As the meeting adjourned, people filing out with renewed purpose, Walter approached me with an expression of genuine respect. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do in business," he said quietly. "You risked everything to save this company." I thought about my parents, my team, the hundreds of employees whose livelihoods depended on Meridian's survival. "Some things are worth fighting for," I replied, "even when the odds seem impossible." I had no idea then just how challenging the rebuilding process would be, or how rewarding. But walking out of that conference room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope for Meridian's future, and pride in what we had managed to preserve through one of the darkest chapters in company history. The weeks following Blake's removal were among the most intense of my professional life. As interim COO, I worked closely with Gerald and the board to assess the full extent of the damage and develop a comprehensive recovery plan. The picture wasn't pretty. Our cash reserves had been depleted, key talent had scattered to competitors, and our reputation in the industry had suffered significant harm. "It's like cleaning up after a hurricane," I told Gerald during one late-night strategy session. "Every time we think we've found all the damage, we discover something else that needs fixing." Gerald nodded wearily. Despite his illness, he had returned to a limited role, providing guidance and stability during the transition. "Blake didn't just make poor decisions, Rhonda. He systematically undermined every aspect of what made Meridian successful. It was deliberate sabotage." The board voted unanimously to pursue legal action against Blake and his cronies. The evidence we'd gathered proved invaluable as our attorneys built cases for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and misappropriation of corporate resources. Blake's friends scattered quickly when faced with potential liability, some returning misappropriated funds in exchange for reduced charges. Our first priority was financial stabilization. Walter led a thorough audit, identifying and closing the shell companies Blake had used to siphon resources. We renegotiated vendor contracts that had been inflated to create kickback opportunities. Within 60 days, we had recovered nearly $2 million and stemmed the bleeding that had threatened Meridian's survival. The human element proved more challenging. Blake's toxic leadership had created deep wounds in the company culture. Many employees were skeptical of any executive announcements, having been lied to repeatedly. Others had formed protective silos, keeping their heads down and avoiding collaboration for fear of becoming targets. I addressed this directly in a company-wide meeting 3 weeks after the confrontation. "I understand your hesitation to trust leadership," I told the assembled staff. "Trust is earned through actions, not words. So instead of making promises, let me share what we've already done. Restored the tuition assistance program, reversed the punitive PTO policies, reinstituted performance-based bonuses, and created a transparent promotion track based on merit, not connections. This is just the beginning of rebuilding the Meridian that Gerald envisioned, a place where talent, innovation, and integrity are valued above all else." Rebuilding our external relationships required even more effort. I personally contacted former clients who had left during Blake's tenure, often facing their justified anger and skepticism. Many meetings started with some version of, "Why should we trust Meridian again?" My approach was direct honesty. I acknowledged the failures under Blake's leadership, explained the changes we'd made, and asked for the opportunity to demonstrate our renewed commitment to quality and service. Some doors remained closed, but others opened tentatively at first, then more fully, as we delivered on our promises. Most rewarding was the opportunity to reconnect with former employees. I reached out to key talent who had left, offering not just their old positions but often expanded roles with greater responsibility and compensation that recognized their value. Janet Simmons, our former HR director who had been forced out by Blake, was among the first to return, bringing her wealth of experience and institutional knowledge. "I never wanted to leave," Janet told me over coffee on her first day back. "Meridian was always more than just a job to me. When Blake pushed me out, it felt like losing family." "I know exactly what you mean," I replied, thinking of my own journey over the past year. "That's why what we're building now is so important. It's not just about business success. It's about creating a community worth belonging to." 6 months after Blake's removal, we had stabilized operations, recovered financially, and begun rebuilding our market position. The board officially removed interim from my title, making me the permanent Chief Operations Officer. At the ceremony announcing several executive promotions, Gerald insisted on being present, despite his declining health. When I founded Meridian 25 years ago, he told the assembled employees, I had a vision of a company that would not only create excellent products, but would be an excellent place to work, a place where integrity and innovation went hand in hand. I nearly lost that vision, and in the process, nearly lost the company itself. If not for the courage of people like Rhonda Wilson, Walter Green, and others who risked their careers to protect what matters, Meridian might not exist today. He turned to me, his eyes bright despite his physical frailty. Leadership isn't about titles or family connections. It's about service, sacrifice, and doing the right thing even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Rhonda demonstrated true leadership long before she had the title to match it. I can think of no better hands to help guide Meridian's future. Gerald's health continued to decline, but he lived long enough to see Meridian not just recover, but thrive under new leadership. We implemented governance reforms to prevent future abuses, including limits on executive authority, regular independent audits, and an ethics committee with real enforcement power. Every major decision now required multiple approvals, creating checks and balances that protected against individual malfeasance. The legal consequences for Blake and his associates were substantial. Blake himself faced both civil and criminal charges, ultimately settling the civil case by returning millions in misappropriated funds and surrendering his equity stake in Meridian. The criminal case resulted in a 5-year sentence for wire fraud and embezzlement, though he served only 3 years. On a personal level, the experience transformed my understanding of corporate leadership. I had always approached my work with dedication and integrity, but confronting Blake taught me that those qualities alone aren't enough. Sometimes, protecting what matters requires courage, strategic thinking, and the willingness to take calculated risks against seemingly insurmountable odds. 2 years after the confrontation, Meridian had fully recovered. Our client base exceeded pre-Blake levels, our financial performance set new records, and most importantly, our company culture was stronger than ever. Employee satisfaction scores ranked among the highest in the industry, and we received recognition as one of the best places to work in our region. Gerald passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years after Blake's removal. At his memorial service, hundreds of current and former employees gathered to honor the man whose vision had created not just a successful company, but a community that had touched countless lives. I was asked to speak, a responsibility I accepted with deep humility. Gerald Harrington understood something fundamental about business that too many leaders forget. I told the assembled mourners. Companies aren't just balance sheets and buildings. They're living ecosystems of human potential, creativity, and collaboration. What matters most isn't quarterly profits or stock prices, but the impact we have on each other and the world around us. In the years since, I've had the privilege of mentoring dozens of young professionals, many of them women entering the often challenging world of corporate leadership. I always share the story of Meridian's darkest chapter and the lessons it taught me. Never assume that wrong will be automatically discovered and corrected, I tell them. Systems and institutions are only as ethical as the people who run them, and those willing to stand up when values are compromised. Sometimes that person has to be you, even when it seems easier and safer to stay silent. Recently, a young operations manager I've been mentoring faced a similar situation, not as dramatic as Blake's systematic fraud, but a clear case of ethical compromise by her superior. She gathered evidence, built alliances with like-minded colleagues, and presented her concerns through proper channels. The issue was addressed, the situation rectified, and her courage recognized with a promotion. "I kept thinking about your story," she told me afterward. "When I was afraid of the consequences, I remembered what you risked, and it gave me the courage to move forward. That, ultimately, is what leadership means to me, not the power to control others, but the responsibility to create environments where integrity thrives, talent flourishes, and people can do their best work in service of something larger than themselves." The title is secondary to the impact. My office wall now holds a simple framed quote from Gerald that guides me daily. "Leadership isn't a privilege. It's a profound responsibility to those who trust you with their livelihoods, their growth, and their professional dignity. Never forget what that trust requires of you." I never have, and I never will. What would you do if faced with corruption or unethical behavior in your workplace? Would you have the courage to stand up for what's right, even at personal risk? Comment below with your thoughts or experiences about leadership and integrity in the workplace. If you found this story valuable, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might be facing similar challenges. Thank you for listening to my journey from operations manager to unexpected whistleblower. Remember, sometimes the most important leadership moments happen when you don't have the title, but you choose to lead anyway.